All right. Good evening, everybody. It being 6:02 on Monday, November 8th, 2021, we will begin our meeting for the Committee of Ways and Means. All votes will be by roll call this evening. For members of the panel, if you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function. For members of the public, any questions you have, please email us at towncouncil@braintreema.gov. And thank you to one of District 5 residents for requesting closed captioning this evening. We do have the closed captioning on, feature on, so hopefully that will help folks to follow along at home. So with that, Clerk Semino, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilor Barica?
Here.
Councilor Ryan?
Here.
Councilor Connors?
Here.
Councilor Flaherty?
Here.
Councilor Sasha?
Here.
All present.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on to approval of minutes. We have the minutes from September 16th, 2021 and September 29th, 2021. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve minutes of September 16, 2021 and minutes of September 29, 2021.
Second.
Thank you, Councilors Connors and Ryan. Roll call vote, please, Clerk Semino.
Councilor Barica?
Yes.
Councilor Ryan?
Yes.
Councilor Connors?
Aye.
Councilor Flaherty?
Yes.
Councilor Sasha?
Yes.
5 in favor, 0 opposed.
Great. Moving on to old business 21050, Mayor, appointment to the Historical Commission, Brendan McCarthy, or take up any action relative thereto. We will not be taking up this motion this evening, so this will remain tabled at this time. So we will be moving on now to new business. 21055, Mayor, the CPA appropriation. Request for appropriation, Doherty Gym, exterior courts and drainage, or take up any action relative thereto. So I would ask at this time if there's anyone from the mayor's office who would like to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. We are joined this evening by several local experts in the area related to this request. We have Planning Director Melissa Santucci-Razzi. We have applicant Jan Barris here with us this evening. We have Jan Walsh, and I'm sorry, I don't know that we've met, but I'm assuming you're also here on behalf of this application.
Yes.
What you have before you and we also have Ed Spellman, of course, Director of Finance with us this evening. What you have this evening is a request to approve an appropriation of $443,000 out of the Community Preservation Act Unreserved Fund. The committee should have received a copy of the application submitted by Ms. Barris, as well as the supporting materials, including several letters of support for this incredible project and incredibly appropriate use of community preservation funds. As provided in the materials, the project would include rehabbing the existing basketball and pickleball courts located at 547 Washington Street, also known as the Doherty Gym, and it would increase the number of courts to from 6 to 8, including a full reconstruction, replacement of fencing and nets, as well as repainting. It also will expand the existing surfaces to eliminate the current grass perimeter that exists within the fence line. When reviewing this proposal, staff also identified some concerns with the drainage in the area. And given the proposal to rehab the courts, we decided that it would also be appropriate at the same time to support some additional drainage work to be done to allow for proper utilities once this incredible project came to fruition. So included in the $443,000 that was unanimously recommended for approval by the Community Preservation Committee at the end of September is roughly $100,000 to support the drainage work to be done prior to the installation of the new courts. And so with that, Madam Chair, with your permission, I would defer to Director Santucci-Razzi or Ms. Barris if there's anything additional they'd like to add on behalf of this request.
Thank you very much, Chief of Staff Taub. Director Santucci-Razzi, would you like to add anything?
Not at this time, Madam Chair.
And Mrs. Barris, would you like to add anything?
No, I think you have everything that we proposed and was approved. So we're good.
Excellent. All right. So with that, I will open it up to members of the committee for questions or comments. Counselor Ryan, go right ahead.
I just couldn't tell from the chief of staff if she was in favor of this. I couldn't tell by the manner of her discussion.
I think it's great, and I can't wait. I can't wait to learn how to play pickleball. So if you're looking for a teammate, Charlie, you just let me know.
Oh, boy. All right. Thank you.
Counselor Shasha, I saw your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I just want to say again, thank you to the pickleball players for bringing this forward. The courts there now are in pretty terrible shape. They hardly get used at all except for pickleball. So the idea that we're going to expand them, get more use out of them, improve them, fix the drainage while we're at it. This is definitely a benefit to the town and especially the residents in the area and any pickleball players. So I wholeheartedly endorse it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Shasha. Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you. I think this is a wonderful program for Braintree to support. I have played pickleball. The players are fabulous. It's a wonderful crowd. It's a growing crowd. It's a great way to support an additional layer of recreation for seniors, well, for adults. And it's going to get my full support because this is precisely how our community preservation funding should be spent.
Thank you very much, Counselor Flaherty. Counselor Ryan, for the second time.
Yeah, in all seriousness, this is a great project. I'm really happy this has been brought forward. And just to echo my fellow councilors, this is the exact way CPA money should be spent. So I'm going to fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Ryan. If the committee members are holding or don't have another question for a moment and they don't mind, I have a few questions and I want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues. I am fully in support of this. One of the things I love about this whole process is that it has been resident driven from the get-go. And kudos to Mrs. Barris and Mrs. Walsh for marshaling so much support throughout the entire community. This is really, you have demonstrated how to get it done. And I'm very enthusiastic and in full support of this funding this evening and looking forward to finished courts. So that actually is one of my questions. And I think for you, Director Santucci-Razzi, I know as I was reading through the materials, the drainage, it reads, it's maybe scoped and priced, but not fully vetted out from a contractual point of view at this point. So my question is if and when this money gets fully appropriated by the council, can the Pickleball Association move ahead with their plans before we get the full contractual components for the drainage?
I think they can, Madam Chair. I believe that in our discussions with Jim Arsenault, and I don't want to speak for him, I think this is something that the town was planning to do internally. If this is something that we need to seek outsource for the work to be completed, one of the things that we were working through and why we didn't have the final pricing, which we have now, is we wanted to make sure that the drainage didn't go underneath the courts in the event that there was an issue with something there and that had to be excavated out. We did not want to compromise the new courts. So there was a sketch that was provided. Do you folks have the sketch from Chris Trudell? I'm just looking through my materials here.
I think we do.
That
I don't know
basically
that we've ever
showed.
received so many letters of support before.
Yeah, there was a lot of materials and videos and everything. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to look at all the materials that the CPC considered when they were making their recommendation. So I think that if the courts are ahead of the drainage, that can happen separate. Again, we've designed the drainage, or the engineering department has, so that the piping and the manholes go around the courts. But the goal would be for, it's not a lot of work. Drainage obviously is very expensive, but this work can happen hopefully at the same time. So once, I think, Jan, I know she's eager to go out to bid. I think that this likely, we could do two things. We could include it in that bid. We do have the money that was appropriated for that. And/or we can talk to Jim Arsenault and see if he is going to do the work and make sure that it's scheduled. We haven't really gotten that far. I know Jan is far along on her thing, and then, we kind of intercepted it with the drainage and just wanted to make sure that it could in fact work there, which it does, and that we had a price for that to make sure that the allocation was sufficient. So I think once we hopefully secure the funds through the council, which I believe is on the 17th, 16th of this month, we'll circle back with Jim Arsenault. Jan obviously has to put all the bid documents and stuff together. Hopefully we'll have a CPC manager on board by then, and we can really continue to assist them in these efforts. So it could really go both ways. And I think that regardless of which way it goes, that one won't interfere with another and or take away from any improvements that are already in place.
Okay. I just know that with the cost of labor and materials, I'd hate for this to be dragged out any further along.
Yep.
And if we can get it, for the pickleball season in 2022, that would be preferable, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the committee or the Pickleball Association, but definitely for residents, that would be ideal. And Director Santucci-Razi, the other couple of questions I had. So I saw, is ZBA relief going to be required for this? Did I read that correctly in the materials?
So, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the town-owned land is zoned open space and conservancy, which has a very, very low coverage. And the goal is to increase the size of the pavement slightly so that they don't end up with a fence line and then grass growing up and then a pavement edge. And Ben Hulk from DPW even weighed in on that and said it makes sense to kind of take the pavement out to the edge. So I have, informed Jan that this might be the case. And what I was going to have happen was to have the engineering department just run some coverages. And if there is an increase there may need to be an application, which we would all obviously help facilitate to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a coverage variance. It's just all of some years ago, the former planning board, they zoned even the fires. I mean, we have sites in town that are 90% paved and they're zoned open space and conservancy. So it makes it difficult sometimes for town projects. The schools are exempt, so they have a little bit of leeway. But you'll see the potential for that here. And potentially you'll see applications also coming forward for the fire station as well. So all of these town buildings are sort of in this same zoning district. It's extremely, extremely restrictive.
Okay, but you don't anticipate that would slow up the process even after?
No. We can,
Okay.
we can look at that in a little more detail, and then, we could put it forward to the zoning board, in January if we had to. But I don't see that causing any delays, and I really don't see that being looked negatively upon either. We would support that. We've been supporting the application all along. Plus, we have the drainage improvements, which helps with the pavement and so forth.
Okay. And then my last question, I saw that on the proposal was $413,000, but the request for appropriations is $443,000. Is that just cushion for overage or?
So when we had gone to the community preservation, we had an original drainage figure from the engineering department. And that's when I had gone back and said, let's not go under the courts, let's go around the courts. So Chris Trudell was still working on that, and we had the community preservation meeting. So
Okay.
having a fair understanding of what things cost, and the committee felt as though it was important to make sure that there was enough money plus in case we run into some contingencies. So we put forward the 443, and yes, you're correct. And the total is the 423. So there's about 20,000 of a cushion there if we need it. Plus
Okay.
the contingencies were built in
Yep.
to those prices as well. So we definitely have enough money, and then we will obviously just be returning anything back to the bucket if we don't spend it all.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for fielding all those questions. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure, Madam Chair.
Do any other committee members have questions for or on this appropriation? Okay. All right. Seeing none, is there a motion for a favorable recommendation?
Motion that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 44B of the general laws and the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee, the appropriation of $443,000 from the CPA Unreserved Fund for the exterior basketball and pickleball court rehabilitation and associated and drainage and fencing at and adjacent to the Doherty Gym located at 538/546 Washington Street, Assessors Map 2022, Plots 1, 01, and 2A. Said fund shall be expended under the direction of the Community Preservation Committee, the Director of Planning and Community Development, and the Department of Public Works.
Second.
Thank you, Councilors Connors and Ryan. Clerk Semino, roll call vote, please.
Council Barica,
Yes.
Council Ryan,
Yes.
Council Connors,
Aye.
Council Flaherty,
Yes.
Council Sasha.
Yes.
That's 5 in favor, 0 opposed.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your time, Mrs. Walsh and Mrs. Barris. You're welcome to stay if you would like. And if you would like the rest of your evening back, feel free to leave.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you all
for
very
coming.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. All right, we'll be moving on now to 21056 Mayor. Resolution to file and accept grants with and from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the Land and Water Conservation Fund Grant Program for improvements to the Middle Street Woods or take up any action relative thereto. All right, so again, is there anyone from the mayor's office who would like to speak on this?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We have with us this evening Kelly Phelan, Conservation Planner, who can speak to more of the details on the project. This relates back to an appropriation made and approved by this council a little over a year ago in the amount of $300,000 from Community Preservation Act Open Space and Unreserved funds for the Middle Street Manatic-Whit River Trail project. As folks might recall, the proposed trail is about 1/3 of a mile in length and will run through the Middle Street open space property, providing access for the public to view and experience the Manatic-Whit River and overall site. The previous appropriation for this was just one piece of a total project cost, which is estimated to be about $587,000. In order for us to gain access to the funds to help support the remainder of the balance due for the work, we need council approval in order to file and accept grants from the state and specifically from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the Land and Water Conservation Fund Grant Program. And that is the request before you this evening that would allow the mayor to file and accept grants and then also take any other such actions as are needed in order to receive that funding specifically for this project. And with your permission, Madam Chair, I would turn it over to Ms. Phelan for any additional details with regards to the project.
Absolutely. Ms. Phelan, go right ahead.
So we have actually filed this grant application for $245,000, and we've been conditionally awarded the grant pending the council vote to approve this on a reimbursement basis. We receive a lot of grants, and all that I've been involved in have operate on this reimbursement basis. So I'm not sure why this particular program requires this vote. I haven't seen it before, but this is what they require. So I guess they're looking for extra assurance that the town is willing to front the money and be reimbursed. But that's the essence of it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. I was wondering the same. Are there any committee members who have questions for the mayor's office? Okay, seeing none. I have one, Ms. Phelan. So it says potential reimbursement for the $245,000, but we're guaranteed $42,000.
Yeah, we have another grant that we've received for $42,000.
Okay, so if we
from this.
and voting for this will get us both of those values.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. That was my question. Thank you. All right. Any other questions from the committee members? Okay. Seeing none. Do we have a motion for favorable recommendation?
Motion for favorable recommendation to the full council to approve Order 21056 as submitted.
Second.
Thank you, Councilors Connor and Ryan. Clerk Semino, is that okay to do as submitted, or we need the full motion because we're virtual?
I always like the full motion read. It is extensive. So if we want to hold off and just read it in full council, that's fine. We do all have the documents in front of us, and they are online as well.
I'm comfortable with that adjustment if you're giving us the okay, Clerk Semino. Okay. All right, in that case, thank you, Councilors Connors and Ryan. And Clerk Semino, a roll call vote, please.
Council Barica,
Yes.
Council Ryan,
Aye.
Council Connors,
Aye.
Council Flaherty,
Yes.
Council Sasha.
Yes.
5 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Phelan.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Moving on to the next portion of our agenda, which is 03321 and 02421. I will read the whole things out, but I want to just let members of the public know this is not for voting. This is for discussion. We don't get to talk amongst ourselves as an entire group unless we have a formal meeting. And these two items are both pertaining to the town's budget and financial outlook and health, and were discussed during the budget hearings in May. So we are revisiting them now as a committee. So this will be a little bit, what I'd like to do, if my committee members will indulge me, is really have this be more conversational. I will do my best but if people want to just jump in and ask questions, I think that would be fine for this portion of the meeting. So the first item we're going to discuss is 03321, Councilor Barica, which is my request on behalf of our committee to review our fiscal Q1, which ended September 30th for 2022, the budget versus our actuals. So where we expect it to be versus where we actually are at this time. So I don't know, Chief of Staff Taub or Mr. Spellman, if you'd like to start us off. I know some documents came out this afternoon.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of kind of updates, and then I also have the materials that were provided earlier today that if it's helpful, I'm happy to share my screen and go through it, or if the committee has it in front of them, whatever is your preference. But before we get to that, I do just want to provide a couple updates on what I'll refer to as our big ticket items that this committee has discussed in the past. The first being the sale of the property at 44 Allen Street. So as folks remember, we signed a purchase and sale agreement in February of this year. that set out a payment schedule contingent on the meeting of certain milestones, taking us from initial deposit all the way through to the closing. In fiscal 21, we received a total of $150,000 in payments. That was both for the proposal security and then the deposit at the time that the purchase and sale agreement was signed. Our next two payments are due in fiscal 22. That is $150,000 once all permits are received, and then $100,000 when pre-application approval is received by the developer, or December 15th, whichever comes first. The project has received planning board approval. That happened at the meeting last month, which is great. And that enabled the developers to submit their applications to DHCD for the state funding component for this project. The group also went before conservation last week on Thursday, where an order of conditions was approved. The only outstanding permit at this point from the town to provide is a stormwater permit, but that obviously will happen much later in the process. So I'm anticipating receipt of that next milestone payment of $150,000 to be forthcoming. And then again, we'll receive that other $100,000 before the end of this year. And I note that because when we prepared the fiscal 22 budget, we did not, that is revenue that we were not counting on. So the two payments that we'll receive in fiscal 22 for $250,000 are effectively going to serve as surplus revenue when we're tying out the year in June. We also have an update on the billboard. As folks might recall, that was sent back from the court for some defects they found in the decision making. That went back before the planning board with a revised proposal that met the concerns raised by the court, which, as this group might recall, were not actually related to the special permit, but instead were relating to the ZBA. The proposal that went before the planning board was done in such a way that ZBA review and approval was no longer required. So the permitting was issued by the planning board. An appeal was filed, but the parties did move forward to the next permitting step, which is the Outdoor Advertising Board, a hearing held before the state, which is the last permit that's required in order to construct a billboard of this nature. That was held on October 14th virtually. The town, as well as the developer, appeared, and there was no opposition to the application submitted to the Outdoor Advertising Board. They asked for some traffic counts. I think they like to check to see how traffic pre-billboard compares to traffic post-billboard, which the applicant was taking care of. And so we would anticipate a decision from the OAB to be, again, probably coming at some point this month. And the applicant has indicated that once the permits are in place, they intend to begin construction on the billboard. And as this committee is likely to recall, the agreement calls for $2.5 million over 20 years, with $1 million coming to the town as soon as that billboard is up and operational. Unlike prior years, that funding was also not counted in the fiscal 22 budget. So any funds received as a result of the billboard will also be considered surplus revenue as we look to move through the remainder of fiscal 22 and start planning for 23. We also recently refunded some old debt. We had a fiscal 2011 debt that we refunded earlier. I suppose that was in October, right, Ed? And so that's going to yield a savings of about $200,000 for the town based on our prior projections. But also, and equally as important, is as part of that process, we also had to reaffirm our bond rating. And I'm happy to report that our AA+ bond rating was confirmed as part of the refunding process. So that's also very positive for us as we continue to look forward. And so with that, Madam Chair, I would look to you. Would you like me to put the presentation up on the screen, or I'm happy to ensure that it gets posted on the town's website with the financial documents as we've done with these kinds of updates in the past? You're muted. No. Madam Chair, you're muted. Uh-oh. You're not muted.
We're going to just take a short recess.
Oh.
She's having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
Okay, so she's going to log out and log back in again.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everyone. I don't know what the heck happened. So forgive me for the interruption. Thank you for your patience. Okay, I think where we left off, you were asking if you would like me, if you want to share your screen. So I think that would be just fine. I do have one question just before we move ahead. The documents you sent, Chief of Staff Taub, were the year-end closeout as opposed to Q1.
No. So the first page of the document was 21 closeout. Everything after that was Q1.
Okay.
I just wanted to provide an update on how we ended as we move into how we started.
Okay, yeah, so if you want to, I think it probably, if the committee members are amenable, I think we can use this time to go through that. That would be helpful.
Sure.
Are you able to share your screen? Looks like
I can do that now.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. Can folks see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let me just organize the little boxes here. Here we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, the first page is an update on how we ended or how we are closing out fiscal 21, which we are in the process of completing. The reports we have as of this time show an increase in the free cash balance from what was projected to be $3 million to actually be $4.5 million, which is certainly good news for us. And that's the result of two main categories. The first is a revenue surplus of approximately $700,000, which comes from an increase of 1.2 million in property taxes, 467,000 in motor vehicle excise, 321,000 in licenses and permit fees, and also accounts for deficits in the rental billboard revenue and in interest income, which, as we all know, took a huge hit as a result of the pandemic. It also has to do with unspent operating budget appropriations of about $900,000. As this committee remembers, we took a hard look at all of the department's operating budgets at each and every supplemental appropriation that was requested and made sure to utilize anticipated unspent funds rather than drawing down from free cash for supplementals. And even with doing that, we had several departments turn back six figures at the end of the year, including human resources that turned back over 268,000, DPW that turned back almost 224,000, Police, who received a supplemental, turned back almost 184,000. The finance department turning back almost a little over 165,000, and the planning and community development department that turned back almost 49,000. And just to note, for a couple of these departments, DPW, HR, and planning all contributed to the supplemental appropriations. So I think this is a real testament to the management of the funds exhibited by these department heads, to make sure that when they're spending wisely and thoughtfully, and not just because the money's in their programs. And I expect that that has continued into this year, and we'll be able to utilize the same process for any supplementals that are needed. So Ed and his team continue to close out 21, and once that is completed, we'll have more final numbers. But as we sit here today, these are our best projections for closing out the year, which again is going to be in a much better financial position than what was originally anticipated earlier in this fiscal year. So now moving on to fiscal 22. As folks recall, a lot of our funding for revenue was leveled from fiscal 21 because we still didn't really know what effect COVID was going to continue to have on our revenue streams. The first slide, admittedly, not a great one, but we'll get this one out of the way. We level funded state aid based on 21 funding, which was $25,262,782. When you take out the offsets and the assessments, that had us coming in at $21,069,434. Unfortunately, what we have received to date from the state on what our funding is going to look like for 22, we're actually seeing a net decrease in the amount of $94,896 from that budgeted amount. That is due in large part to a significant increase in those state assessments. I think when we presented the budget, we do the chart and we talk about what those assessments fund, and a big component of it is the retired teachers' healthcare. When teachers leave our system, they move into another system, and then we are responsible for a significant portion of their health benefits, which come out of our assessments. So in total, our state aid for fiscal 22 is coming in at $20,974,538. Now, I have reached out to our local delegation to see if the state's anticipating a supplemental with some of the additional funding they have. And so hopefully we can gain additional funding in the state aid bucket for fiscal 22. But at this point, these are the numbers that we're looking at on this side of the revenue stream. But with that out of the way, we will move on to meals tax. Again, we level funded meals tax from fiscal 21, which included a 25% reduction off of the pre-pandemic value. The total estimated revenue for this year is again $936,000. And based on prior years, as this committee recalls, we break that down by quarter with an estimated receipt of $230,724 in Q1. Happy to report that our initial earnings are showing at $324,644 for Q1 alone, which is almost 35% of our total year's projected revenue for meals tax. So obviously a significant increase over the projection, but also a significant increase over Q1 of fiscal 21, which came in at just shy of $199,000. So we're starting to see that trend in the right direction. And again, because this revenue, as with hotel tax, was budgeted so conservatively, any of that excess that we see at the end of the year will be surplus revenue that we can utilize to cover other potential shortfalls. So the next large revenue stream is rooms tax or hotel motel tax. Again, level funded from 21, which included a 50% reduction over fiscal 20 values, and that had us projecting a total revenue of $632,500 and a Q1 projection of $155,911 for the July-September. Our initial reports here show a total Q1 revenue of $311,110. So as we sit here, we've earned almost 50% of the entire year's hotel motel projection, which is a significant number, and it's certainly a significant increase over fiscal 21 Q1, which came in at $192,729. So, we've coming pretty close to doubling last year's earnings and have well exceeded Q1 and frankly Q1 and Q2 combined revenue for hotel motel tax. So we did have the Hyatt reopen, which certainly has helped, and we are confident that this number will also continue to rise, leaving some surplus for us at the end of the year to cover any other potential shortfalls. Also having a good Q1 are licenses and permits. This number, as you saw in an earlier slide, came in well over in fiscal 21, yielding some surplus, and is on track to do the same in fiscal 22. So these are fees brought in through the building department, and they include building, plumbing, gas, electric, certificates of occupancy, inspections, and also signs. The total raised to date is $615,665, or almost 37% of the full year's revenue projection, and also nearly double the total amount received for the same period of time in Q1 for fiscal 21. So again, continuing the trend, this revenue source continues to show a significant increase over the budgeted projections, which we're hopeful will continue throughout the year. The last main item I have for update, and then I can talk about a few other things, is police overtime. So as of the end of October, police overtime expenditures were about $603,000, which good news, approximately $91,000 under budget. Bad news, as a result of the collateral effects of the June 2021 incident and kind of the ripple effect that has on unanticipated absences and necessary leaves. We are anticipating that police overtime needs are going to exceed the budgeted amount. And unfortunately, that's just not something that we could ever have planned for. And I, certainly didn't want to find ourselves in this position for a variety of reasons, including most importantly, the safety of our officers. The chief and his team continue to monitor and make adjustments where they can in order to reduce the overtime costs, and are certainly cognizant of the fact that additional funding is going to be required. Now, that said, I have begun I don't know if Director Santucci-Razzi is still here, but we talked about it earlier today, my sniffing around for extra cash in the department's programs, which is not a phone call anybody likes to get, but certainly something we have to do. And as we begin to identify funding in the existing appropriations, we're projecting, while there will be a need for supplemental for police and a little bit for fire overtime, that's looking to be well under $1 million at this point for both departments. So again, despite the unfortunate events of June and the impact that has had on staffing, still projecting a much lower need than what has been the need in years past. I can talk generally. I was hoping to have a golf update for you this evening, as they have been utilizing the food and beverage revolving fund, which has certainly been helpful. As everybody remembers, we had an incredibly rainy July. I think it was like the third wettest July in history, and obviously that had an impact on golf revenue. But then we had an unseasonably warm October, which helped counteract some of the losses. And we've also had a lot of our large tournaments come back and hosting events at the golf course, which have helped kind of to balance out the wet start to the year. And as I said, I was hoping to have more specific numbers from Darren Brown this evening, but when I receive those, I certainly will pass them along to the committee if you're interested. And I know that Ed and his team continue to work to work hard reviewing numbers, and Lorraine looking for grant opportunities and making sure that we're availing ourselves of all of the potential for funding that exists, working with the local delegation on items like the water treatment plant, particularly with the new infrastructure bill that was just passed that has a water component to it, and also for the renovations to the fire station, which I think everybody agrees are much needed, just to make sure we're taking advantage of all of the funding opportunities out there to help support and take some of the pressure off the operating. With that, I'll just note, I'll say this is certainly a more positive picture than one I was afraid we would be looking at this year. I think businesses are on the upswing, revenue is on an upswing, and we'll continue to watch our pennies closely and make sure that we are being wise in our spending so that we can also realize some savings as we move into the second half of this calendar year, or the second half of the fiscal year, and start the new calendar year and prepare for fiscal 23 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief of Staff Taub. I think if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we can see all the panelists, and if we need to come back to it,
yeah,
we can. That's okay. All
yeah,
right.
perfect.
Thank you. So thank you very much, and thank you, Ed, for putting that together. And I know we also have our next item as well, but before we move on to that, do the committee members have questions pertaining to the Q1 update? Councillor Connors.
Hi, so I have a couple of questions, a couple of comments. Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak. So all through the budget season last year, we spoke of getting regular updates on actual costs. I know this is something we continue to harp on, and I see that Councillor Madam Chairperson had to put in an actual request, to get this update when we've been asking for one for a while now. So a little disappointed that we actually have to put in an official request to obtain updates when we were told we would get them on a regular basis. The update that we received is a highlighted update. What we believe that was requested was a budget to actual. So when we ask for a budget to actual, I would think that's a line item budget to actual costing that comes out from every department to see where we are, not just general highs and lows where we can't see everything. So the point of getting a budget to actual in my world is to see where we are in every level, not just in certain ones where we're up and maybe a couple we're down, but on every line item where we're up, where we're down. And I'm not saying down to the level of each person, but I'm saying just to the level of each department, each, budget line item that they have, whether it's personnel, whether it's operating, whether it's transportation, whatever it is. I would say that needs to be corrected going forward. And I know I'm being replaced in January, but this is something that I'm sure will continue on going through. I do have a couple of questions. FY21, the police turned back $184,000. So I know we went through a bunch of stuff last year with them coming down and asking down to like 5 cents on line items to get money into their budget. So what happened that we turned in $184,000 after all of that last year?
So I think, and Ed can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, if you recall when we were doing a lot of the overtime, there were some grant funds that were pending. And so police have within it several programs. And so if there was grant funding that came in after the fact to offset some of those, that would certainly have an impact on the funding that was being returned. And so my instinct without verifying that is that played a big part in it. But I certainly can go back through with Ed and see where the money came from. And then
just curious to find out where we did all the supplementals last year. Why all of a sudden we got $184,000 when they were scraping for every penny, and literally penny.
Sure.
On line items. And then and I assume it maybe has to do with COVID funding or something, but I would like that answer as to why they turned it.
Can I just know before? So I'm happy to provide you the year-to-date actuals. It's 400 plus pages. it's not like a simple, I'm happy to share it at any point, and so I will follow up. I have a Q1 like through the first week of October year to date, or I can get an updated year to date and provide that to you. If you tell me what your preference is, you'll have it tomorrow.
Okay, I don't think we're looking, like I said, I don't think we're looking for the 400-page report with every personnel line item of what
That's not,
down to their salary, but just in general, like every department, you know, when they have the different areas within their department, you know, the 100, the 200, whatever it is, just a general line item, like 3 or 4 line items for each.
that's the 400-page report, Counselor Connors. Unfortunately, it's every department with their
Oh,
underlying.
Sean's raising his hand. Wait a minute, let Sean chime in here.
Go ahead.
If you want, I can send more of a summary. It's 40 pages. I'm looking at it right now. I can run it by department, division, and by character code, which breaks it out by salary, other salary, contractual services, supplies, and other expense. That's typically what I would think you'd want to see from a higher level standpoint.
Yes.
So I can get that
That'd be
through
great.
period 4, which is the end of October, for expenses.
Through the
Right.
chair, why can't we get that from the town? Why do we have to get that?
Why
from
do we
the
have to
office?
ask?
Well,
ahead, Counselor.
respectfully, I've never said no to providing data to this committee. I don't set the agenda for Ways and Means, and so the chair opted to set it up as a formal referral. Director Spellman and I are at every meeting, and so we're always happy to do that, but we need to know what you're looking for. We talk generally about wanting updates, and so this is the way we've historically done the updates. I'm no expert in running reports in Munis. I'm going to look to Ed and ask Ed if he knows how to run the report that Sean just referenced, so that we can provide it. What I have and what I utilize to look for funding, is a 400-page report that I searched. I'm going to turn it to Ed, and I'm going to deal with this little monster over here. Thank
Your
you.
dog is also upset about the Q1 actuals to budget. So, and Counselor Shasha, I see your hand raised. So I think if I can paraphrase, if we can get the 40-page summary, whether it's from Sean or from Director Spellman, and I go ahead, Ed, that I think would satisfy the committee, and in addition to the narrative that was provided.
Right. And I would just like to add, I would like to see it on a standard regular basis. Like going forward, we should either get it monthly, quarterly, it should just be sent out to the Ways and Means Committee in my eyes without having to ask for it. Like whether we set the precedents now for a monthly report or a quarterly report, I don't really care which one, but there should be a report that goes out and it should be public and it should be understood exactly where we sit, at least by every quarter in my eye.
Go ahead, Director Spellman.
As far as the revenue report, we are running behind on that. We're having some staffing issues in the treasurer's office. In addition, the treasurer's office is working to go live with our payroll for January 1st. We're in the process of running bi-weekly payrolls for the actual payroll that we're doing to pay employees in SoftWrite. And on those off weeks, we're running a bi-weekly payroll in Munis to work out the bugs, tie everything out so that when we go live, it'll be a clean break when we go January 1st of the calendar year for our payroll. In addition, the treasurer's office is working on going live for our real estate and personal property taxes in mid-January. And we're in the process now of going through a 5th pass with Munis, taking our existing files from SoftWrite and just reviewing them and tying out the totals to make sure that we have a clean break when we go live with that. In addition, the water and sewer is going to be going live at the end of the month. That's going to be the billing for the water, sewer, and stormwater. And as you're aware, basically residents receive a bill quarterly, and that town-wide basis is broken down into thirds so that the water sewer department is billing monthly 1/3 of the town. And
Okay, so thank you, Ed. I think one way or another, it sounds like, I want to acknowledge and recognize all the hard work of everybody on the financial side. So if this is something that we can get either through Sean, if that's easier for this quarter. That seems like one way or another, it'll be feasible.
Just sent.
Oh,
The
thank you,
expense
Sean.
report's fine, and we will get caught up on the revenue posting and get the budget for the revenue into Munis. And my goal would be to get you a quarterly report, one for revenue, one for expenses for the general fund. And then for the, on the expense side, one for the general fund as we have it coded. And then the second fund would be for the school department budget. So.
Thank you. Go ahead, Counselor Shasha.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Yeah, so I do agree we need more information. I mean, some of these, the larger items in, for example, local receipts, as motor vehicle excise taxes, if that is above or below expectations, even by a little bit, it can have a pretty big impact on the total number. So, I guess this is more a question for Sean, but the format that you laid out in the long-term budget would be a great way to see a quarterly report. It's not 40 pages, but we have every line item that we would need to see. So if it's 40 pages, if that's what's easy to do, that's fine. We can read through it. But the format that you have laid out there is great.
So just
ahead,
on
Ed.
that, Counselor Sasha, motor vehicle excise, we won't actually see those numbers, Ed, is that until March, right? Because that's when the first commitment comes in, so that's why we don't have that now.
Yes, through the chair. Motor vehicle excise commitment, the largest one comes at the end of February, beginning of March. And that first commitment is a commitment for approximately 27,000 bills. And that represents approximately 90% of our fiscal year motor vehicle excise. So we've received some commitments 3 and 4 for the calendar year 2021, but the largest one and 90% of the revenue for us will be coming at the end of February, beginning of March. And that's just the way the registry sends it out. Their first commitment for the calendar year comes out at that point to all cities and towns.
Okay. Is it consistent year to year? Not in terms of numbers, but in terms of when it is received. So okay.
Yes.
So if we look at Q1, even though it's a small piece of the total number, it could still give us some insight into how we're doing versus last year.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think all these numbers would help. The other thing I'm curious about is, I don't know if anybody's ever looked at this, but is it possible to break out? I noticed in the licenses and fees, it mentions you have, construction, but then gas companies and things like that. Is it possible to look at just the residential and commercial construction permits? And is that in any way, does that in any way foretell your new growth number for the year?
The licenses. Oh, go ahead, Nicole. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think that Mary Beth can break it out just in building permits, right? Which would be, I think, looking to capture what you're talking about for residential and commercial. Is that what you're asking? Just the building permit itself?
Yeah, if it's possible to break that out, I'd just be curious if you look at the past couple of years, does that give you some idea of where your new growth is going to come in by the end of the year? Years where people are doing lots of construction, building, the assessed value of the property goes up, new growth number presumably goes up.
Sure, I can work with Mary Beth on that.
Is that how the new growth is calculated, though? I don't know if Sean or Ed.
Sorry, it's so it is a piece of it. Any kind of new permits pulled, and actually on my when we get into it, I did put an educational material YouTube video that came from actually it's DLS or DOR, one of the two, and defines how new growth is calculated, which does include development and construction of existing parcels, conversions of parcels into subdivisions or condos, and also changes to a physical parcel. If something went from an exempt property to a non-exempt, et cetera.
Thank you, Counselor Shasha. Thank you, Sean. Counselor Ryan, did you have your hand up?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Counselor Ryan. Go ahead, Counselor Connors.
Sorry. So I know I sounded a little frustrated earlier, and I'm sorry about that, but I think we've been asking for this for so long that and when we get it, like when I saw it today, I was like, this isn't the report, that we were looking for. I know you guys are working really hard, and I know you're trying and you're switching over systems, and I get all that, but this town has been screaming for transparency for a while now, and I really think we really need to start just getting the information and getting it on a regular basis so that it can be dispersed and shown and people can see where the money is going, and not only that, where it's coming in. That me like buzzing out?
Understood.
Yep.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Connors. Counselor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Counselor Connors just reminded me, I did want to ask about the timing of when the information is available, because at this point, this information is a little bit stale already. But it sounded like Sean said he already had information through October. So the question of, are we looking for quarterly or monthly might depend on the answer to that question. When can we actually see updated information?
So I think it depends on what type of information you're asking for. If you're asking for year-to-date expense, we can run that at any point. A 40-page report, honestly, news to me. I work off the big one because I like to see the individual lines and programs. I just think it's helpful to see where the money's being spent and where it isn't. But that can be run at any moment in time to provide a snapshot on the expense side. I think revenue is different because it's dependent on when it's collected. And so that time frame or that interval is probably more reasonably to be done quarterly, just because that's how collections are done in most cases.
Sean,
Okay.
do you have a recommendation? I'm sorry, Counselor Shasha.
No, that's fine. I'm good. Thank you.
Sean, do you have a recommendation? Is quarterly sufficient in your mind, or is monthly better?
I think quarterly is fine. And, if you wanted, like Nicole mentioned, if you wanted the expense side of the world, you could do it on a monthly basis. And, I certainly don't fault Nicole whatsoever. She's brand new to Munis. I've used Munis now for 16 years. So spitting out reports, I also designed the chart. So I know how to get the data out of there.
You could have opened with that, Sean.
I'm sorry. I made sure to say
He
it
was
now.
holding out on you, Nicole.
So in order to extract reports and the different features of the reporting, Munis is so much light years ahead of what was previously had here, where it was really cookie cutter types of reports. Munis, you can do a lot more to geek out, a lot of more cool things in terms of reporting, historical reports, budget to actual, et cetera. As Ed mentioned with the receipts, yep, they're a little bit behind in posting, but we know why. There's some staffing issues and a whole lot of other stuff going on right now. That doesn't mean things aren't hitting the bank. It's just meaning on the GL side. So that piece might be a little bit more in arrears, if you will. But depending upon what you're looking at, if it's a certain kind of license or permit, if it's motor vehicle, without that background knowledge as to when this comes in, and maybe we can set something up that would kind of give you guys more of a general overview, like Ed mentioned about motor vehicle. Yep, the majority of that's going to come in the springtime versus, your retirement payment for pension, that comes in July. So you'll never see another, well, I shouldn't say never. You'll normally never see another retirement payment except for that 1st of July in that month. So these are things you wouldn't know unless you've actually sat in a finance director chair or town accounting chair, et cetera, just living the day to day.
So maybe if I may make a suggestion to the committee, why don't we review the 40-page report that Sean just sent over the next week or so? And if we feel as a committee that meets our needs and the needs of our constituents and the residents, then maybe quarterly is the appropriate update, and the next quarter ends, I want to believe it's 12/30 or 12/20, 12/31. I don't know when that Saturday is, but and then we could have a redo of this at the beginning of January. But I think we should review the 40-page report first and find out if that's satisfactory.
Can I just say one thing about the 40-pager? So you will notice that in the encumbrance column, you will see negative encumbrances. Don't worry, it's only because fiscal year 21 is not closed in the system yet.
Okay.
Once it closes, those negatives go away. A budgetary adjustment gets rolled forward into the system for those encumbrance amounts carry forward. So don't freak out about that. That is normal. You can only run it on a GAAP basis right now because the prior year is not closed yet. So again, nerdy accounting stuff, but
Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
Counselor Connors?
Sorry, just one more question. And I'm sure this is the confirmation. Nicole, I'm with you. I'm the 400-page girl. I would love to have the 400-page report, but for expediency, starting with the 40-page report, Sean, if you can just confirm, if I look at something on the 40-page report and see something that kind of sticks out, I can go get the detail on that or ask for the detail, correct?
Yep, correct.
40-pager will give me the overview of like plus and minuses. I can look at that and say, holy moly, what's going on here? And say, somebody get me the detail on this, and then I can get the detail, right?
You will see it by department and or division, and then by what we call character code. So I think this will be sufficient, but yes, if something looks wonky, we can certainly dive deeper into that.
Right, and pull the additional data so that you can look at specific line items on that.
Yep,
Okay.
You can see each line item, and not that I'm recommending this, but you can even go further into each line item, look at every transaction within each
Every
line item.
transaction. Hey, look, I usually delve that down daily on work, so that's not
You
an
know what you're going to do over the next 2 months, Donna, so thank you.
I know, and I want them to go public because I'm no longer on this committee, so I want to start seeing them when I'm a resident.
You bet. All right. Any other discussion, questions, or comments on the Q1 2022 budget versus actual before we move on to Sean's model? Okay, in that case, I want to thank Councilors Connors, Mackin, and Shasha for putting this on our agenda. And I know this has been on for a couple of meetings, which is to develop and review a long-term budget forecast. Also something that the Ways and Means Committee discussed in depth during the budget hearings last spring. And Sean, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee and the full council for the work you have put into this effort to help us understand what we're looking at. I've reviewed the model. It is detailed, it is extensive, it is a ton of work. So thank you for taking the time and effort to do that. I really appreciate it, and I think I speak for all of us saying that. So with that, I think, Sean, if you want to kind of take it away, I know you plan to share your screen, and then if you're amenable, I would say we could field questions as we go, if that. Okay.
Perfectly fine by me. And I'll probably just do a higher level overview, and then feel free to ask questions along the way. I first would like to start with the actual just PDF document, because I did plan to hit like kind of the high levels there. So let's see if I can do this. And I apologize, I have 3 screens in front of me, so hopefully we share the right one.
Yep, that's
right.
The PDF.
Excellent. So this is just meant to be your top level overview of how the structure works. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of the first 2 pages. But what I do want to do is just hit on the last couple bullet points here and just talk about the turnbacks and free cash, because I think this group as a whole wants to know how free cash is generated, how we're doing, how we're maintaining it, so on and so forth. So tabs 18 and 19, once we get into the Excel doc, I think are important and ultimately show how free cash is being spent, worked, and generated. So I did create just a little chart here that I think is useful. I'm a visual learner myself, so this helps me. Just to give an understanding of how free cash is currently being used, just to help supplement some of the most recent budgets and how free cash generation is being affected by that or by one-time revenue uses. So, not everyone loves charts, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Free cash use going up, free cash generation going down, not a great trend, and they sort of intersect right between fiscal year 17 and 18. In addition to this, I know we talked about this during the fiscal year 22 budget, but I just think it's important to state again that without continued non-recurring revenue, such as free cash, grant funding, sale of town-owned land, etc., the pace needs to change in terms of spending. Now, we could spend probably weeks and months as to how we got here, but that's not what my focus is, and that's not what I'm here to attempt to do. I started with the fiscal year 22 budget, ran some prior numbers as to what actually happened, and then tried to forecast out what may happen in the future. In addition to non-recurring revenue, when I talk about the non-recurring piece, you can also see the increase in the usage throughout the time since fiscal year 16. In fiscal year 16 to 18, it was pretty flat, below $1 million. It starts to grow slightly from 19 to 20, and it really spikes between 21 and then going forward, projected to 23 and 24. And we'll get into the reasons why in a second. But just think of non-recurring revenues. They're part of your other financing sources, but it's not indirect transfers like water, sewer, golf, and stormwater. That's your other enterprise fund. It's more the one-timers, and there's a whole page for that as well too. Continuing on, I think this piece really hits it home in my eyes, and I thought about setting up a separate chart to break apart the two. But think of it this way: your net tax levy is the only revenue that you can, quote unquote, guarantee will grow at a certain percentage over time. Prop 2.5 is built in to make sure that occurs, and you will always have new growth regardless of the size of that new growth. There will obviously be some sort of building improvements, permits, as Councilor Sasha mentioned earlier. So there will always be some sort of new growth. If we look at that growth compared to the appropriation growth, these two obviously cannot sustain each other and are growing at different rates. You may see that in recent years, it went from 3.35 down to 3.3, and that expenditure-wise or appropriation-wise, it's up around 3.8 down to 3.6. Percentage-wise, not a huge gap in the two, but dollar-wise, huge gap in the two. So here's the crux of the matter in my eyes, is that if we're going to continue to grow appropriations around the $6 million range, $5 million range, and our net tax levy is only getting to 3.6, 3.8, that difference, that delta, has to be plugged with local receipts, state aid, or other financing sources. And they all must continue to grow to fill that gap. And as Nicole just went through comparatively to fiscal year 21 and 22, and I know we're living in COVID times, but state aid only grows about 2%, I think, for a year for the past 5 to 6 years. Not a significant amount. So 2% off of, I think, 20 or so million isn't going to help complete that gap. It'll help, but not completely. Same thing with local receipts. We've seen local receipts actually decrease over the past few years. Yes, between COVID, yes, between not so great interest rates, but also having items in local receipts that were more one-time, like the billboard rental or other one-time items that came through those pasts. So to me, this last two tabs is the crux of the matter. And how do we fill that gap between appropriation increases and our net tax levy increase? If all we have to work with is state aid, local receipts, and other financing sources, in my opinion, something needs to change, or you will continue to use one-time non-recurring revenue to balance your budget. So that's at a high level. We can start going into the Excel doc, but I would rather just take questions now and then also go through the Excel as people want, because I certainly don't want to sit here and go through 20 tabs of this Excel document. So I'll pull up the table of contents and open it up for questions to your choosing.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was really helpful. I will defer to my colleagues on the committee for questions.
I can't see everyone, so you lead
Yeah.
the way, Meredith.
I will be happy to. Okay, Counselor Shasha, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Sean, this is fantastic. Better than I thought it was going to be. Begrudgingly, I will admit it's better than the one that I did. The summary tab says it all. It's a concerning picture of the next few years. And I love the fact that you can drill down into detail as needed. I have a couple of kind of technical questions, like how you came up with the year-over-year rates for things like state aid, because they seem to jump around a bit.
Sure do.
But I don't know if we want to get into that level of detail at this meeting, or if I don't know if I honestly don't know if I really have any big items that I would say, can you add to this? Because I think it does everything that we would want it to do and gives us all the information we need. I'm going to just say one thing that I would like, but since I'm not going to be using this going forward, if the rest of the committee doesn't think it's valuable, the way in your model that you change future growth rates, you have a series of drop downs.
Yes.
Right. Like, so local receipts, you can change every single percentage for every year going forward.
Correct.
Which is great and very detailed. Sometimes it's easier when you're thinking about what if scenarios to have like a drop down where you can say, what if, motor vehicle taxes grew at 8% every year instead of having to change every one. But again, I think the way it is, it gives you a really true picture of where we're headed without your own assumptions baked in, which is why I think it's really valuable.
Well,
so I think that's all I have. And thank you so much for doing it.
No, thank you. And I appreciate it, Counselor. And I remember when we first talked, and I did get your file too. I know we talked about flexibility, right? And options. So as I started to build this, I thought to myself, man, if I want to change a couple percentages here and there for 1 year or one, section, I don't want to go physically into a cell, which is, maybe hard coded or just linked to 1%, because once you change 1%, they're all going to change. So I had to kind of think out of the box a little bit in building this drop down. It may look a little, uglier, but at the same point in time, it is below the actual data set itself. So that it does allow that flexibility, as you said, so that you can change those items in the front. I also do want to point out too that and just like I said in the email, I did leave this budget unbalanced because I didn't want to assume two things: free cash use or cuts. I didn't feel like that was my role. And I didn't feel like that was my place to try to get those in there. And in addition to, we wanted a all-inclusive budget. So fully fund police overtime, fully fund fire overtime, add back some OPEB, and anything else that I don't want to say typically comes up during a supplemental, but you might find during a supplemental. So I tried to incur all those costs up front so that in theory, one wouldn't have to go back for a supplemental unless it was transfers between funds and departments.
Counselor Connors, did you want to jump in? You're on mute, Counselor Connors. You're still on mute. Hold on. Let me see if I can unmute you. I don't know. Uh-oh, we're having Zoom problems.
You're not frozen, Counselor Connors. I think that's what you just said. I think I'm frozen. No, you're not frozen. We just can't hear you.
I don't know. Zoom has gone wacky. There you go. You look unmuted.
I beat my mouse up. That's what I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I would just want to reiterate exactly what Councilor Sasha and you have done a phenomenal job at capturing exactly what we're looking for, where it's an overall projection. We can see out 10 years from now where we're going to sit and how we're going to sit, and what we need for growth to compensate, and what we need to do in order to build up a free cash again and build up our reserves again and get back to where we need to get back. So I haven't had a minute to really delve deeply into your spreadsheet, which I'm looking forward to because I'm a spreadsheet girl. But I really appreciate the time and effort put into this, because it does absolutely, like Steve said, it absolutely on the summary tab captures everything we're looking for. And it gives us a one-shot view of where we are and what we need to do to get to a point where we're secure again. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for everyone's, participation and kind of guidance to start this process too. And Councilor Sasha, just to jump back to your point that I forgot to address, when you talk about state aid and how did I come up with an average, just basic 5-year average, right? So you're right, state aid does jump around a bunch, but all I could go by was what I have historically. So I know that fiscal year 21, maybe fiscal year budget of 22 is lower than normal. So we could change this to make it a 3.3 or a 3.5. We could certainly modify that and change that average. Again, it's best bet right now. We don't know what the state's going to do. No one thought that we were going to actually have a loss or a decrease in 22 based upon the 21 budget, which was also conservative as well too.
Go ahead, Councilor Sasha. You're also muted. Councilor Sasha, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. John, I was more curious about as you go forward into like 24, 25, 26, 27, the growth rate. So I would have assumed that there would be an average growth rate for the past couple of years, and that would carry forward every year going forward. But like 24 is 1.9%. Then it drops down to 1.7% in 25, 1.4% in 26, back up to 1.7 in 27. It's not consistent. And I didn't know if there was some like almost seasonality that is baked in there.
No, it's just a moving 5-year average. So every year.
Okay.
Yep. So I kept on moving that 5-year average down the line. So eventually it does cap itself out or average itself out, I guess, if you will.
Right.
I can't see most of my screen, but around the 1.6, 1.7 is just that consistent 5-year average as we go. Could you certainly bump those up and change it, or maybe make it something else baked into that average? Of course. But at the end of the day too, I don't know if increasing something, 1 to 2 to 5 percentage points necessarily on state aid is going to make a large bit of difference. Right. When it looks like we're talking about 300 to 400 grand maybe in increases, unless something drastically changes with the state.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Sean, if you don't mind, I think it would be helpful if we can just if you could take a few minutes and walk us through the summary tab here, because you have, starting on line 27, also your assumptions. And I think so that, at first blush, it's like, you could fall off a cliff looking at the potential deficits, but if you can talk us through your assumptions, I think that would help us.
Sure.
Please.
So for the top part, for the original, again, no major assumption changes except for ARPA. So ARPA, for those who don't know, it's the American Rescue Plan Act. If I even got that right, I'm all over the place with ARPA nowadays. Each individual community in Massachusetts got their own NEU money, this non-entitlement unit money. And then there's also county money. So as part of Norfolk County, you have money available, and ARPA has about 6 different buckets. One of them is revenue loss. So there's a calculation you can do annually starting for fiscal year 22, which you guys have already actually used some as part of your fiscal year 22 budget, of about 1.8 million of ARPA funds. So that's the only piece that I assumed we were going to use over the next couple of years. ARPA expires December 31st, 2024. So if the thought process is, and if we can calculate it, if there is a revenue loss to be had, we can use those federal funds to help offset your budget for 22, 23, and 24. So that was my big assumption for the top part. Down below under the revised. So Prop 2.5 override. As we talked about, and as I've said to other clients too as well, I don't personally think Prop 2.5 is sustainable in the long term. I think communities are going to need additional growth, whether you're a suburban area or an urban area, but especially more in the suburban piece. So in order to balance 24, I did have to throw an override in there of about $2.7 million. I could not see, without using one-time revenue sources like free cash, which obviously can be used, but I feel like the committee wants to try to get away from that. I did have an override as part of that, which we can talk about more in a second. Trash fees, I know it's a hotly contested item down here in Braintree, but the bottom line is that whatever you generate for revenue is not actually paying for the trash expenses themselves. There is a deficit, if you will, between the fee, the user fee, and the actual cost. So in talking to Ed, the average price, if you will, is about $150. If we increase that $25, it will generate additional $250K for the year. So that will increase your local receipts. So I did bake that into my local receipts estimate. New growth. So historically, over the past, I think 5 years, it's been about 0.92%. I did increase that slightly, and that increase is simply an average of like communities that are either in the general area or size and their average growth rate. So that's also baked into this as well. Now, obviously, to prove new growth, you have to have new growth. So even though we're looking at other communities and say, well, they're growing X, why can't we grow at X? It's not quite as simple. But I did put that in there too, just to see what it could be if we did add it another 0.3 or 0.4%. Talked about both ARPAs, and then potentially, and I did not put this in there, but additional overrides or cutting appropriations. And those are things I didn't want to assume. And that's why my focus is really on the past or the next few years and not really looking out past 2024, 2025. All the numbers are there from the data, but in order how to solve the problem, I did not necessarily tackle that because I think it's part of a larger discussion.
So Sean, if you go to your top, so if nothing else changes, and I know that's a big if because local receipts, we know some are going to already coming in above projection. But you factored in $2.7 million of a fanciful override.
Only in the revised section.
Right. And otherwise we're going to be 700,000 in the hole next year and then 3.8 the following.
If you don't use one-time revenue sources, if you don't make cuts or find other uses. So
and if funding doesn't increase more than you've got it already baked in the back end for local receipts.
Correct.
Especially.
Yep.
Okay.
And which I will say, I was conservative at, but just to dive into that just for 1 second. And I also put the percentage of each local receipt here too, because I think that is important. Sometimes we talk about certain fees or certain penalties and interest, but in the grand scheme of things, your quote unquote money makers is obviously your motor vehicle, also some pilot agreements. There's your solid waste fee, your trash fee, and some other fees and license and permits. So below are my assumptions and estimations. And a lot of these are flat because the only way you generate more is if you increase fees or if you have a big influx of projects. So I'm happy to hear, obviously, that the town is far beyond what their projection is for 22 for license and permits. So for this purpose, could I, jack this up to say 5%, 10%? Yeah, sure, we could do that. I just don't have enough detail to understand why it's going up. So if there's major building projects going on, if there's major construction going on, and we know that it's coming, sure, you could do this. Because as part of the finance team, they have to get this certified by DOR. And they have to explain, I believe it's over 5%, Ed, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you do something over 5% change from a prior year, they are going to ask for documentation. They're going to ask for explanations. They're going to want to know how you got there, because they don't want someone baking in a, oh yeah, we're gonna expect a 10% increase for license and permits to simply balance the budget.
Yeah.
They only want it if it's going to be real or expected. So without my knowledge of what may happen in the future here, I left these pretty flat, outside of ones that like our meals and room, as Nicole mentioned earlier. And I do have another quick screen I just want to pull up here. If I can move it from one to the other. Do you see this new one here now?
Yes. Rooms actuals, meals actuals. Yep.
Yep. So I did run anything from fiscal year 19 to 21 for meals, and also anything from fiscal year 19 to 21 for room. Those are actuals pulled right off of DLS. Those are your actual numbers. So this was the amount that was reported for meals for Q1 of 22, for room for 22. So yeah, it's a 63% and 61% growth from the prior quarter. If that were to continue, then we'd be over our fiscal year 19 actuals. So I don't expect that level to continue, but you never know. So if that's the case, if we are growing faster than expected, then we could certainly move our budgetary expectations up and get those on there. Again, DOR would just have to get some kind of confirmation from Braintree as to how and why you're expecting to grow it this way.
Yeah.
So just wanted to show that.
And I just want to thank you so much, Sean. I just, because this is being recorded, I just want to make sure if people watch this later on, they understand that the model we've been looking at is a model and it's a scenario builder. So just be cognizant that, you know, the request of this committee was to do exactly, and I think, thank you, Councilors Shasha and Connors for already relaying this, but just to reiterate, was to basically say, if nothing else changed, what would happen?
Right.
So I just want to make sure that residents are clear that this is a scenario builder. This is not reality right this minute.
This is a draft of all drafts.
Yes, but it's a useful tool for this committee to think and understand about revenue projections and our financial health, I would say.
And I agree with you. So if we just move to net tax levy too, I mean, this is it. It's a formula driven, right? So we know what our 22 tax levy is projected to be based upon the budget. So after that rolls into your next year's levy. We add in our 2.5%. We have our debt excluded amount, which we already know based upon debt service schedules. And our new growth is, yes, assumed based on percentages. But everything else is formulaic. So unless our new growth goes up a lot, which I did increase, like I mentioned, for fiscal or for the revised section, that's really our biggest factor here. And then, yes, that will then get baked in to the new year's base tax levy. But that's why I thought that chart or that table was very important to show at the end of that PDF, because there is a delta missing, and just we can't expect this net tax levy to grow at the same rate as our appropriations. Something has to give, or a different way to fund the budget has to be found, in my opinion. Is there any other tab, Chairwoman, that you would like me to go to specifically? Perhaps appropriations, because I know you obviously everyone looks at that every year for the budget.
I want to defer to committee members if there's any questions first. Okay, no, okay. Thank you, Councilor Connors. Yeah, go right ahead, Sean, if you want to run through appropriations, and then I know I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think it will also be helpful for us to spend some time with this, and then maybe, you know, even if we have a 10-15 minute section in our next meeting to go back and ask additional questions, if you're amenable to that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I did spend a lot of time on this, so even by me looking at this towards the end, I was getting my numbers.
Yeah.
I actually had I had one of my seniors reviewed after too. I'm like, please make sure every formula works, because I've been on so many tabs. I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
things,
no, this
things
is
work appropriately.
incredibly sophisticated. And I think it's going to be very helpful. So if you want to run through the appropriations and how you set that up, I think that would be great.
Sure. So, every spring or late winter, we get the budget information from Ed and the mayor and Nicole, and I just wanted to simplify it for the point of this projection. I know typically when we do our Ways and Means and we do our full council meetings, we analyze every department, every division, every line item, it seems like some nights. I wanted to get away from that. Otherwise, I would still be building this today. So I based it upon function. And when I say function, think general government, public safety, your main items that you would build an appropriation on. And then I broke it down by salary versus expense. And the reason I did this was because expenses are, salaries are obviously contractual. So I don't believe that CBAs are approved for fiscal year 22 and on, or 23 and on. I don't have that exact number in my head, but all I can do is make projections. And I know in the past, for the past 2 years, expenses have been asked to be decreased. Per order of the mayor. I believe 1 year was 4%, and I believe 1 year was 10%. So I thought breaking those two out were going to be very helpful, because if you're trying to decrease overall spending, and unless you're making positional cuts, then it has to come from your expense versus your salary, generally speaking. So that's the majority of these functions, and that's how they're broken down. I did break out overtime. I believe that was a direct request just to show that. And I did, again, fully fund that, assuming no supplemental appropriations and assuming historical averages and levels. Education, the same. I did break out the regional assessment, which is for Blue Hills. I just broke that out because it's separate. I also built out snow and ice, and I did start increasing that a little bit, 25 grand per year. It's not a requirement, but as we all are Bostonians or from the area here, we know that snow and ice can be a significant expense every year.
Sean, let me just go ahead. Chief of Staff Tab, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. Sean, I'm just curious, when you broke out salaries here,
Yep.
Is that just pay, or is that also the contractual benefits, cleaning, clothing, eyeglass?
It was anything with a 51 object code. So within Munis, the way, and I think it's the latter, Nicole. So anything that with a 51, which would be, professional salaries, and I believe some of those benefits that you're talking about, I believe those are baked into the salary amount there.
So the salary line is intended to cover those non-discretionary contractual, all encompassed, and then expenses is everything else from office supplies, utilities,
correct,
gas, etc. Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Culture and Rec, Health and Human Services, same deal. Library, we did break out because there is that minimum requirement, minimum funding. Everyone's favorite, debt service. So the way I broke this out was that we have your regular principal payments and your interest payments. Then I also have both exclusions for principal and interest, which helped me out too, because I could actually link that right to my net tax levy for the debt excluded amount. I also then put in an estimate based on new capital plans. So this 272 is just an average of new debt service. I believe I pulled this from one of Ed's capital books at one point, where essentially if debt falls off and new debt's added, this is the net impact of that debt. So I had to add the line into there, which will then be added into next year as well.
Yep.
State and county charges, that's your net difference, or your payment, if you will, to the state between your state aid and your county and your state and county charges. That's how you get to your net payment. Broke out pension, health insurance, and other. And other simply represents workers' comp, employer Medicaid, etc. And then these two, don't know how we feel about them, but I know there's been talk about building back a stabilization fund and getting our OPEB transfers back in there. So essentially for a transfer to stabilization, that is being funded by free cash. So if there's a transfer to stabilization to help build back that reserve, it's coming directly from free cash. So think of it going from one reserve to another, but by putting it in your stabilization, you can set it aside. It will earn interest and it goes directly to that fund. It also requires a 2/3 vote to use it versus free cash, which I believe is majority.
Counselor, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sean.
No, go ahead.
Counselor Connors, did you want to jump in?
I just had a quick question on when going back up to the debt service, estimated annual new debt. So you're saying the 272,000 flat line that you put in there basically is if we take away debt and we put it back up to the original amount only, that's not saying that we take on more debt, right? So if we have to take out another debt exclusion or not even debt exclusion, but if we add debt to what is existing to debt, that increased significantly.
So this is your net annual payment increase. So yeah, you might issue, let's say in fiscal year 22, the town's gonna issue 20 million worth of debt. Well, that 20 million worth of debt, it might only be a couple $100,000 worth of payments. So if we have 400 grand fall off and we've got 600 grand coming on, that's that net difference that we're adding to that debt service.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
Chief of Staff Taub.
Thank you. I hope it's okay, Madam Chair. Just
of course.
I think I probably missed it, but DPW was its own section, right?
That is correct. Public
Okay.
Works.
And then
Sorry.
Public Works. Could you scroll to the bottom where it breaks out what is included in each category?
Yes.
So I'm just curious. For me, it might be helpful if public safety is just police and fire, and health and human services is those categories plus municipal licenses and inspections. Just in how I don't know how, I don't want to change kind of how the committee is looking at it, but for me and kind of how we group things, I might look at those a little bit differently, particularly where the health department and substance use prevention falls within municipal licenses and inspections as one department. I would maybe seeing what that kind of looks like, because we know that the overtime shortfalls are police and fire. And so I think it would be helpful if you're breaking it out to see exact what is just that. And not municipal licenses and inspections, if that's
Sure.
something that we could take a look at.
Yeah,
So
I can certainly change that, but just to let you know too, this overtime I believe is strictly just police and fire, but I can click on that tab in 1 second too. And
so
the reason
So then the salaries are police, fire, and municipal licenses and inspections.
correct. It's here and here.
And I believe, and maybe this isn't exactly what you were getting at, Nicole, the substance use prevention is in health and human services. I'm open to changing it. I think initially the thought was because licenses and inspections, like we think of those as health inspections, building inspections, it feels like public safety, but I don't know how other members of the committee feel. I think that was the initial thought. Councillor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Yeah, I think everything I say is premised on Sean, if it's not too difficult. What you've done is so good. Like I don't want you doing tons of extra work, but I would tend to agree with Chief of Staff Taub that breaking those out might be beneficial. And I might even go a step further and say if it's possible to break out police and fire separately, because at some point, what we do with this might very well be to think about, what is the trade-off between hiring more police officers and firefighters to reduce overtime, and the overtime expense for those two is fairly different, and it might help in the long run to have them broken out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, that's something I can certainly do. And just for my own, I don't have to justify it, but my explanation as to why I had this municipal license and inspections in there is because UMass, which is the Uniform Massachusetts Accounting Standards, they view inspections, your municipal license as part of public safety. So that's why I moved it in there. I believe it also has a department code in the 2s, which is public safety, but I can absolutely move that and also break out police and fire further as well too. It's just getting my, yep.
No, sorry. And then the historical commission that you have there, that's the payment that the town agrees to make every year to support them, right?
That's my assumption as well, without going back and looking at how that
Okay.
was initially developed.
No, really helpful. Thank you, Sean.
Yep, no problem. So ultimately, you're going to see a massive, quote unquote, increase from fiscal year 22 to 23. The reason it is so much larger versus the projected year it's going out is because of education. And here's why, is that I had to put back in $3.1 million in costs that were extracted from the 22 budget and put into ESSER, funded by the ESSER fund. That was a one-time source. So it took out those costs that would typically be incurred in your fiscal year 22 general fund budget and moved it out. Now that ESSER is no longer after 22, we have to put it back in or find another source. And there could be other educational revolving funds or grants that could absorb some of that money. But I would be hard pressed to think that 3.1 million is going to be completely unabsorbed by the general fund. And then just continuing down here, each one has a drop down, like we talked about. For salaries, again, I just assumed, I know typically CBAs are bargained at a 3-year level. So this certainly, I did not talk to anyone about this. This is just a general, let's get some percentages in there. I did 1, 1.5, and 2, except for education. I did 4.5 all the way. And the reason I did 4.5 all the way is because typically, from my experience with schools, there's anywhere from 10 to 15 steps in multiple different lanes, multiple different step increases throughout the year. So if you're getting a 2% COLA, you have to tack that 2% COLA onto your step increase. And when I quickly ran some numbers earlier, and I don't remember exactly what unit this was, but it was within the most recent CBA for schools. And again, I apologize, I did not write down whether it was teachers, paras, tutors, whatever. These are the 10 to 11 different steps. And these are the annual dollar value. This is the dollar value change, and this is the dollar value increase. So even though it was a 2 to 3% COLA, you're never just going to pay 2 or 3% for someone moving up until they're at year 10 or 11. Then it truly just is a COLA increase. So I wanted to put that in there because typically in seeing the school budgets in the past, you do have your COLA increase, but you also have that step and lane, which is easily over $1 million as part of it. So I just want to make sure to add that in, and that's why the educational salary amount is higher than most other ones. So that's the top level appropriations. I didn't know if there were any other questions, but I can certainly make those changes that we talked about this evening at a point in time.
Sean, if the committee members are amenable and agree, I'm thinking, I wonder if it makes sense to hold off on you doing any more work on the model until we have a second, till the individuals on the committee have time to sort of like get in there, because I'd rather just give you everything in one package, and then we can make the changes. But I'm certainly just one voice here, so if other people feel differently, let me know. Go ahead, Councillor Connors.
So one question, Sean, down the bottom of your sheet, and I'll get to Meredith afterwards. Is EOB other? And what is that? Is that EBO or is that EOB?
It's EBO. I apologize.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something crazy.
Nope, just me misspelling things.
Yeah, it's what you get for looking at the same sheet for so long. You don't.
Seriously.
Absolutely. And I would agree with Madam Chairperson, in that we, at the next meeting, again, put it on the agenda for further discussion once we have time to look at it. And then at that point, finalize, if you could make that one change and then resend it out, that would be great for us to go ahead and look at it and then reconvene for another, little session and then move it forward from there.
Yeah, and if folks have and I know we don't have our next meeting scheduled, but two things I would like to do is make sure we review this again before year end while we still have Councilors Connors and Shasha with us as part of this committee, because they've been instrumental in moving this forward. So thank you both for that. And also if we can, get a series of questions to Sean ahead of time, that will also help facilitate the discussion as well, I think, and be useful. So, it's not like it's happening this week. And I'll be mindful of time, but let me know if there's any other constraints people have, because I think this is hugely important. We're able to exercise the power we have by delivering information to residents and to the full council. And so the more that we can understand and be able to relay this information in accessible terms, I think the more helpful it will be to all of us and hopefully to the town as a whole.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Chairwoman Boerica, too. I certainly don't want to go making changes, one day and then have to wait another, 2 more days for other additional changes. I would rather get them all lump sum, if you will.
Agreed. Other questions, comments? Sue, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I just do want to look at one other tab with everyone tonight while I have you all. So this was just the turn back tab, if you will. So just to show what the town typically appropriates versus what they turn back. So when I say turn back, meaning it's not spent, it's not encumbered, it is a give back. As Nicole showed on her preliminary 21, I think it was around 900 grand, which is great because that's the number I sort of came up with too. So we're right there in lockstep. So on average for the past 5 years, it has been below 2% or even below 1% in this case. And so to me, it's important you do have a buffer. Even though you may look at this and say, wait, you're saying that we didn't have to appropriate 1.6 million, we didn't have to appropriate 1.4 million. If you don't give yourself a buffer, then you'll be doing more supplementals, which I don't think anyone wants. And also by having a buffer, this unencumbered, unexpended amount is a positive to your free cash generation. Without a turnback, no free cash generation for the appropriation piece. Yes, you will get some for revenues if your revenues outpace your revenue budget. But for expense wise, I would never want to see a zero across the bottom because I think you're actually hindering yourself in the long term.
Thank you, Sean. And again, thank you for the incredible depth and amount of work that went into this. I'm so appreciative of having you as part, working for the council. So thank you. Sue, do you mind gathering questions together as they come in to you for Sean, and we can just get them together for him in one fell swoop?
Absolutely. That's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. Go ahead, Councilor Shash. I see your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I just wanted to see if there was a sense when we might meet again and when we want to, because presumably whatever changes we have, Sean will need some time to incorporate into the model. Yep. So I just want to make sure that I get him everything in plenty of time. But I do want to spend a lot of time looking at the model too. So are we thinking like two weeks-ish? That's going to take us.
I mean, I was thinking, I don't know, maybe after Thanksgiving, because 2 weeks takes us to Thanksgiving week, and I think that's
that's
going to
true.
be tough for people. But maybe, Counselor Shasha, if we can, I think, I don't know, do you have a suggestion?
No, you're right. I forgot about Thanksgiving. I mean, I guess if we tentatively say right after Thanksgiving, then if we get you stuff by next week, is that reasonable?
I would say early on next week would be better. I already know for that Thanksgiving week, obviously a couple holiday days, and will be doing a little bit of traveling. The other days I could try to make one a dedicated Braintree day. It just depends upon some other deadlines for that week. So I would love to get it, if possible, for next week so I can work on it towards the end of next week.
Yeah, and we can work on, I mean, we have a lot of schedules to coordinate too, so we could work through, all the other committee meetings and council meetings and making sure Sean has sufficient time. Counselor Connors, go ahead.
Slow tonight. I am slow tonight. So I was going to suggest having all questions into Sean by the 16th, no later than, so he can work on it the rest of the week. And I think that gives us sufficient time to look at it on our side. And then that gives him, that gives us over a week to look at it, get it to him by the 16th. That gives him, time to work for it Thanksgiving, and then reconvene on the 30th or whatever.
Sean, does that seem reasonable?
I'll tell you in 1 second. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second so y'all don't see my Outlook calendar and see how,
thank you.
See how crazy it is.
Awkward moments.
Yeah, that would be great actually by the 16th, because then I can already book you guys for a couple days at the end of that week. So that'd be great.
I think that feels very fair.
And
Thank you for the recommendation, Counselor Connors. And that gives, I know for most of us working a weekend to review everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone again. I know this was a longer than average meeting, but I think it was really important, and I appreciate everyone's time and attention, and thanks for sticking out with us, sticking it out with us, Sean, and Director Spellman and Nicole. So I think with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's seconded by Colombo and Counselor Ryan. Thank you, Counselor Connors. Sue, a roll call vote, please.
Counselor Baraka,
Yes.
Counselor Ryan,
Aye.
Counselor Connors,
Aye.
Counselor Flaherty,
Yes.
Counselor Sasha.
Yes.
5 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.